I'm gonna first talk about a little bit of Tennessee history. And most of us had Tennessee history in school. How many of you had Tennessee history in school?
Let me cut the lights.
Please, please. How many of you remember? Remember some? But we're gonna start off with the simple stuff, 1776. That's when we declared independence. 1775 is when the first shots were fired. 1776 is when we declared independence from England. So, 20 years later, Tennessee became a state. And we became the 16th state added to the Union. Now, America was started, declared their independence in 1776. Tennessee started in 1796. Can anybody tell me when the first settlement in Tennessee was started? Take a guess. Jim, you got a good guess. I know you do a lot of.
I thought it was like,
Are you talking about the whole state?
Well, of what is now Tennessee, the first settlement, the first European settlement. How's that,
Was
Joe?
it
There was settlements here. There was native settlements
Was
here.
it 1804?
1804?
no.
No, it was a little bit earlier than that. Let me show you when the first settlement in Tennessee was started. 1714. That's a lot earlier than a lot of times we think about people coming into Tennessee.
I'd never, of all the searching I've ever done, I'd never run across that.
Yeah, Charlesville. He settled in a place called Fort Lick. It was way up in East Tennessee. But that was very early settlement for Tennessee. And actually, it was against the law to be over in this part, over on this side of the Appalachians, doing anything. As far as settling, they were supposed to be on the other side. Very early settlement. And that really amazed me. But 1756 to 57, Fort Loudon was built. Fort Loudon was a French and Indian fort. It was built up there. That's actually our grandkids standing in front of the replica of the fort that's there today. There is a fort. It's not in the exact same place. Now, Fort Loudon was settled in 1756, or built in 1756, 57. It just lasted till 1760. The reason it just lasted that long is there had been some Indian uprisings, and some of the leaders over in North Carolina wanted to talk to some of the chiefs of the Cherokee. Well, the chiefs went over to talk to them. When they did, they took them prisoner. And not only did they take them prisoner, they hung them. Now, the Cherokee had a very strong blood law. And it's something that we read in the Bible today. You know, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life. And the Cherokee believed that very strongly. So when that happened to their people over in North Carolina, they started attacking the fort. And they were relentless with attacking the fort. Well, the people in the fort, they said, hey, look, we'll leave. The Cherokee said, okay, if you'll leave everything in the fort, leave it just like it is, and all the stuff that's in there, and y'all can leave. They said, well, we'll never make it over the mountains. Can y'all give us an escort? Cherokee said, yes, we'll give you an escort. Well, they got them several miles out of the fort, and they killed 25 of them. The 25 was the same amount of their men that was killed when they went over into North Carolina. The rest were taken prisoner and stayed prisoner for a pretty good while. Later on, I think I got another picture of the fort here. This is pictures of the fort right here. They left the cannons and everything. The Cherokee ended up burning it down. They really had no need for it. You see the lake there in the background? The original fort actually sat down in that lake. This is not the exact spot of the original fort. If you ever get a chance to go up there, it's in Vonore, Tennessee. Go up there and check it out. They have living historians there most of the time. We took our grandkids, we've been up there several times. We took our grandkids up there and they absolutely loved it. But go up there and check Fort Loudon out. 1769, Robert Crockett, right here in Overton County. The first European killed in Middle Tennessee that's documented. There may have been another one, but as far as we know, he's the first European killed in Middle Tennessee. And there's several stories. Some of the stories say he was just attacked and killed out of the blue. Some of the native stories, there was a man from Oklahoma come into Standing Stone Day one time, and he told us that Robert Crockett had desecrated the Standing Stone, and that's why he was killed, because he had went up there and desecrated one of their monuments, and they killed him for it. Me and Jim have done a lot of research on this, and I have never found, and Jim's never found, and if you have, please tell us, another instance in Overton County, that a white person was killed by a Native American. This is the only instance we can find. There's family stories of people being taken captive and so on like that, but when you look back into them, most of them happened in East Tennessee before they ever got over here. But this is the only time we can ever find any kind of documentation that a white man was killed by a native in Overton County. Now, by 1771, there were 3 permanent settlements in Tennessee. Watauga, at what's right now Elizabethton. There's a settlement in Sullivan County, where Sullivan County is, and Rogersville, at present day Rogersville. Now, Watauga, they also have a fort. There's a replica fort up there. It's right at the Sycamore Shoals. It's a state park. It's a great little place to go, and they have got a great little fort built there. But there again, it's not on the exact location. If you do go up there, the fort is about, the actual location of the fort's about a half mile away, and it is marked with a historical marker.
Well, don't most books consider that the first settlement?
Actually, they consider Rogersville one of the first settlements, but there will be something that we're going to talk about just right here in a second. That was now this is a thing at the Watauga Museum. It's one of their storyboards, and the reason I put this in there is because we know some people from Overton County was at Watauga. And Isaac Crabtree was one of them. He killed an Indian there during the horse race. Now I know I'm kin to the Crabtrees, Donna's kin to the Crabtrees, and there may be some other here that's kin to the Crabtrees. But they were at the Watauga settlement. Also the Campbells, they come in here, the Campbells and the Thrashers. We know there were some Thrashers at Watauga, that their people was here. So they were here, they were in Tennessee very early, but that was one of the storyboards that they have in their museum. The Watauga Association, and this is probably what you're thinking of, the Watauga Association was formed with all the forts and stations around that area. And this was the first free and independent government in America. The very first. It was before the Declaration of Independence. It was a very illegal document according to England. They were writing letters back and forth about this. They set up a court system. They set up judges. They set up land offices. They set it up like a regular government. But they done it without England's approval or without North Carolina's approval. They were just free and independent. They got over here and the boys just said, hey, we're over here, nobody's helping us. We've settled this. We're doing it by ourselves, and we're going to set up our own kind of government. And they did. They did. And I think that right there, and of course that included the Sullivan County, Rogersville, any station that was in that area. And we'll talk a little bit more about stations and forts here later. But they all had a say in it. And each station, each fort had a judge. They set up a judicial system. They were hanging people if they were doing wrong. They were going to trial. They were hanging them. They were dealing with them in the legal system, which these men that signed this, which we don't know who they are, because this document is mentioned several times. You see a lot of mention of the document that they drew up, but this document did not survive. So we have no clue of who actually signed it. Of course, you got the figure. They were definitely on the frontier at that time. They were definitely on the frontier, so they didn't have a nice safe to put it in or anything like that, you know, and it probably just got washed away or just ruined, absolutely ruined. This is pictures of Watauga, the fort that's up there now. And Elmo, I wish you could have been there. These young boys up here in the corner fiddling, amazing. They played Scottish music. They're all like 14 and 15 years old, and they were absolutely amazing, wasn't they, Teresa? They go all over the country and do these reenactments, and they do the 1700s style music and do a great job. This is another place, if you ever get a chance. We went to Watauga, Cowpens, Kings Mountain, and out of all, and the Cowpens and Kings Mountain are national parks. This is a Tennessee state park, and it was a lot better than either one of the national parks, I have to say. It was a great place to go. They have a lot of living history stuff up there. They have, a big reenactment in May that's absolutely amazing. That's when these young boys come out and fiddle, and you see some real good living historians. Now all this, every bit of what we just talked about, and this is not all of Tennessee's history, we're just briefly going over some of it. All that happened before the United States was a country of its own. We were still under England. So there were people in Tennessee well before we became the U.S. There were people in Tennessee. Now after, this kind of gives you a list of when the counties that became Overton County, because Davison County started in 1784. That's when Tennessee was still under North Carolina. One of my ancestors, when he first moved to Overton County, it says he moved to Davison County. He lived in Hillham. But all records says he moved to Davison County. So that tells me when he came here. He came between 1784 and 1787. I know that just because of the way that the counties changed. Sumner's in 1787, 1799, Smith County, 1801, Jackson County, and then in 1806, Overton County came into play. So we've been several different counties, and a person could have lived in all 5 of them counties, including Washington County, North Carolina, if they come here before 1784, and never moved. And they could have lived in every one of those counties. So sometimes when we're researching and looking back at deeds, we got to know when these counties changed over. And we may actually be looking for something for somebody in 1799. Well, why ain't we got any records of him in Overton County? Because the records wouldn't be in Overton County, it'd be in Smith County. You know, 1784, the records wouldn't be in Overton County, it'd be in Davison County. I got a motorcycle running. But know that when you're doing your genealogy. 1780, the settlement of Big Lick. Anybody know where Big Lick is? Nashville. Nashville was Big Lick. They took 30 to 40 boats, 4 months down the river. They went down to Tennessee and come back up the Cumberland to reach Nashville with 40 boats and settled in present day Nashville. Could you imagine climbing on a riverboat with no clue where you're going? They thought the Tennessee River was going to take them straight to Nashville. They didn't realize they was going to have to go to the end of it and turn around and come back up the Cumberland. They didn't understand that. But that's what they had to do to get to Nashville. Now they packed everything that they needed on them boats. So you're talking livestock, you're talking your cattle, your horses, your seed, your family, whatever you had to take at the time, they packed on these boats and hit the river, which had to be a dangerous ride, but it did take them 4 months to get there. That was probably a pretty quick trip considering the people walking. 1780, May 1st, right after they got to Nashville, one of the first things they done was drew up the Cumberland Compact. The Cumberland Compact was their government, the way that Nashville was going to govern itself. Now, one thing that's very interesting to me about this, it was signed by 265 men. 265 men. Guess what? One of them had to make their mark. Out of 265 men, one had to make their mark. We didn't have illiterate people coming to settle this area. They were educated and smart people. You don't set up a government like they were setting up without an education. And this right here, you know, a lot of times we hear, well, people back then just couldn't read or write. This proves it wrong. One man made his mark. This is Fort Nashboro. Back, I don't know, probably in the 30s. You can see the old cars around it. You know, today it's been revised. Whoever went on the little trip to Nashville, we seen the little bum sitting in the fort talking about cutting wood or something. I don't know what the man was talking about, but it has been revised and redone. It sits right down on, I guess, what you consider First Street. Lebanon Road's what I always called it. But that was their fort. Now, when they was in that fort, there was an awful big battle in that fort. They actually abandoned Fort Nashboro. The men got out there fighting, and they were split up by the Indians. The Indians kind of had them split up, and they come around on the back side of them, and one of the women turned loose the dogs on them. Now, when settlers come over here, and we'll talk a little bit more about what they brought with them, but couple of the main things they brought with them was horses, and they said every man that come over would bring from 4 to 30 horses. They didn't go wide on the horses. They brought 4 to 30 horses. And the one thing they said on the frontier that was just as valuable as a horse was a dog. So they were bringing about as many dogs with them as there was horses. Now they were bringing different kind of dogs. They were bringing stock dogs to watch their livestock as it roamed around. They were bringing hound dogs, hunting dogs. They were bringing rat dogs for the forts. They were bringing little feist and little rat terrier type dogs to get the rats. And then they brought what they called war dogs. I don't know what the war dogs was, what breed they was. But the fight at Fort Nashboro, the men were about to get killed till this woman went over and let loose the dogs. And when she did, the dogs went out there and run the natives off. Of course, the natives run the settlers off. They went up in Kentucky for quite a while after that, for a couple of years actually. 1784, the state of Franklin was formed. John Sevier, of course, a lot of Sevier descendants in this area, a lot of the Sevier descendants here. The state of Franklin was formed, and John Sevier was elected governor. You listen to any historian talk, and it burns me up, and I get mad every time I hear it. They will say Sam Houston was the only man that was ever governor of 2 states. That's wrong. John Sevier was governor of 2 states. So Sam Houston was not the only man that was governor of 2 states. Of course, the state of Franklin, it was short-lived. It lasted for 4 years. But John Sevier was the governor of it, and then when Tennessee became a state, John Sevier again was the governor. So he was a governor of 2 states, and anytime you hear a historian tell you that, bust them in the chops. Get on them. They're wrong. This is in Hawkins County. This was another one of the early settlements. This is Thomas Gibbons' house. When Franklin formed in Hawkins County, or Spencer County, state of Franklin, the first court met in his house. Now there's a lot of Gibbons in Overton County now. This is actually my 5th great grandfather, and his house is still standing. There's people actually still living in this house. It was originally built as a log structure. It's been built around, but there's people still living in this house. So these East Tennessee people, they all migrated this way. Fort Blunt. Everybody know where Fort Blunt is? Down in Jackson County. You know, it was built in 1784. These forts became very important to the settlers. Buchanan Station was built in 1792. Now, when I was a kid, I grew up in Nashville, and my school bus passed this house every day. Every day. If you're going to Nashville and going down I-40, and you pass where Percy Priest Dam is, that you can see off the interstate, the next road is Stewart's Ferry. Just past that, between Stewart's Ferry and Donaldson Pike, there's an overpass right there. If you're driving down the road, next time you are, right over on the right is where Buchanan Station was. Now, Buchanan Station, in 1992, 300 Creek and Cherokee attacked Buchanan Station. This is considered the last major Indian attack in Middle Tennessee. The people inside, which didn't come near numbering 300, I think it was about 85 or something like that, they fended off the 300 attackers. Now, there's a historical marker down there, and it talks about Miss Buchanan and some of the other women. When these forts was attacked, the women didn't just sit by. Now, at this one, they said there was one young girl, and she was getting tore all to pieces when the Indians was attacking, and she was about to go open the gates. Well, if she had opened the gates, they'd have been overrun pretty quick, and the battle would have been over. But Miss Buchanan took and just slapped her in the face and said, "Get a hold of yourself, girl." You know, Miss Buchanan started running powder and bullets to the men up on the wall. And they were doing all kinds of stuff. The women were taking the men water while this siege was going on. And after they had won, 2 weeks later, I went the other way, didn't I? 2 weeks later, Miss Buchanan gave birth. She was pregnant, and she was out there hitting it. You know, she was out there right in the midst of the fight. You know, when you're put in a situation like that, nobody is safe and nobody's free. 96, the Cumberland Gap was opened. That was the first road coming into Tennessee. A lot of settlers were already in Tennessee, but this is the first opening, the first road that you could travel with a wagon. Now, you had some roads inside of Tennessee that had opened up, roads and paths inside of Tennessee. Now, you got to understand that the early roads and the early paths in Tennessee were privately owned. They were not state owned or federal owned, they were privately owned. So people had toll booths. If you got caught skipping around the toll booth, which a fare for a toll booth was, they said $12 or 12 cents, 12 and a half cents, 12.5 cents. But if you got caught skipping around it within a mile and a half, you was fined $5. I'm sure that was a huge fine at the time. So you went through these toll booths. But the men that lived there, they were the ones that kept the roads up. They were the ones that kept the paths up, and they had the government's permission to set up a toll there. Now, if you live, say Jim lived real close to Elmo, lived real close to where the toll booth was, they had the option to come help on the road a few days out of the year, and them and their family got free passage through the toll booth all year. So, but if they didn't help on the road, they still had to pay that toll too.
You know why it's called the Emory Road System?
It was named after a man named Emory.
That plotted it maybe?
Yeah. I think he was the one that created the first part of the road, and then they just named the rest of it after. So before Tennessee became a state, the way all the settlers come in was just like this right here. They walked. Or they got on a river channel, or they walked in. Now to me, I think walking would be a lot better option than the river channel. I swim like a rock, so I'd take the walking. But you got to figure, women and children, all your livestock, most of the time, the women were in charge of the little kids. They were in charge of the meals, making sure everybody got food. The young boys were the ones driving the stock. So when you got a party up to come over and settle, say we wanted to get together and settle in Overton County, you're not going to take just anybody that comes up and says, hey, I want to go. You're going to look for people that has skills. You know, you're going to need a blacksmith when you get there. Because to put shingles on your house, you'd have to have a nail. And who can make that? A blacksmith. You got to have somebody that had some kind of medical learning. Not necessarily a doctor. Somebody that knew herbs, knew home remedies, that could help you in a medical emergency. You had to have people that could set up looms, knew how to build houses, knew how to build mills. You had to have people that were skilled. You had to have soldiers or explorers that knew the country. You had to have men that was able to fight. You had to have women that knew how to sew, knew how to midwife. You had to have the right people coming over with you, because if you didn't, you could be in a bind real quick. Now, a lot of these skills, blacksmithing, I'm sure most of the men had some understanding of how it worked. But were they good blacksmiths? What else would you want with you? A good gunsmith. That was a necessity. Every fort, every station just about had a good gunsmith in it. Why they came to Tennessee? Why did people settle Tennessee? Why did they come here? Land grants, right? A lot of them got land grants, which is great. Why do you think North Carolina and the U.S. government give them land grants in Tennessee? One, they didn't have money to pay them, right? I mean, our country started out in debt. It really did. I mean, we started out at war. We started out in debt. And they didn't have a way to pay these soldiers. But looking at it from the government's perspective, we want to settle this new land, and we know when we settle this new land, there's going to be a fight, right? It's already settled. There's already native people on this land. There's going to be a fight. The government's cheap. They didn't want to arm an army and send into Tennessee. So they sent soldiers by saying, hey, you got 640 acres over here in Tennessee. All you got to do is go collect it. The Revolutionary War soldiers that come over here opened up the West. Plain and simple, they opened up the West. They done it as a military force, an unpaid military force. And give us all the access to everything behind. But they done it unpaid. They were fighting for what they thought was theirs. The natives were fighting for what was theirs. And the government was sitting back and reaping all the rewards from it. That's just the plain and simple of it. They really was. But they opened up all this country. And they come here because one thing you got to realize, a lot of these men were from wealthy families. You know, why would you leave a wealthy family to come here? And the same thing when people was coming from England to America. They were leaving wealthy families. The Stuart family goes back to royalty in Scotland. but they come here. Why did they do that? And you'll see this until people start migrating over the Appalachian Mountains. Because the firstborn son got it all. They got title, they got land. This was a tradition started over in Europe. They got the title, the firstborn son got the title, they got the land, they got the majority of the money. Some of the other kids got some money. They didn't have no land, they didn't have no title, they didn't have nothing to stay there for. When they settled in New England, you see the same thing happening. You see the firstborn son, they just brought that tradition over with them. The firstborn son got it. They got the land, they got the farm, they got the biggest part of the money, they got the livestock. The younger sons done without.
Mr. Chairman, that goes back to the old Bible, too.
It does. It sure does.
It was
But-
a good idea, I thought.
I didn't, I was the youngest son.
I
But
was the oldest, so I thought maybe they shouldn't.
But that is something that would make a person leave a well-established, wealthy family to settle the new land. After they did come over the Appalachians, you do see that changing some, because through the 1860s, that changes quite a bit, where a lot of the kids receive about the same. And then you hit after the Civil War, nobody had nothing to leave anyone, so nobody got nothing.
Well, the girls, the daughters didn't get nothing.
They didn't get nothing. They better hope they married good.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, a lot of times you'll see them getting left a bedroom suit.
Yeah.
Something very simple, you know, something very simple. But the daughters did get left out a lot. Those guys right there is good friends of ours. That's Bill White and Dan Loftis. That was up at Watauga. They do reenactments. They're really great guys. The early settlers come to Tennessee horseback, foot, and by boat. What could you bring with you? What would you bring with you? Elmo, what would you bring with you?
I don't know. I never thought about it.
Your family? Of course, that'd be you first. You bring your wife and your children and your family.
You need to bring a gun and an axe.
Need to bring a gun and an axe.
You needed to bring seed if you had
Exactly,
seed.
see? Now, they're walking. They're on horseback, so they're packing. They're packing on horses. You've got to bring a little bit of food, but you're going to hunt most of your food. That's why you watch who you bring with you. That's why you select the people that comes in your party. You want to have good hunters with you, so you ensure that you eat. They can't pack enough food, or they can't preserve enough food to carry over here. You know, I know some of the letters that talks about Big Joe Copeland. When he come over here, you know, he was eating turkey breast in place of bread. They say he was eating turkey breast in place of bread. So he was eating the turkey breast and maybe some deer meat. So it was protein, 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 you know. And they said when they went back and they picked up the rest of their party, that he got him some bread and he didn't like it. He had got so used to eating the turkey meat for bread that he would have rather had that. But they had to bring stuff to set up a forge. If they wanted a meal, you know, they had to bring their millstones. Or they had to bring an awful good mason with them that can make a millstone. If they didn't pack them over, they had to bring somebody with them with the skills to make that. So anything, when they set up housekeeping, they say that most families had, each person had 2 outfits. 2 outfits. And they wasn't fancy go to meeting clothes. They were just clothes. So, after a while, they probably went into having buckskin, something like that. They went into having fur hats like my skunk hat, because clothes were out. So they'd have got them something like that. That's where you get the coonskin cap, you know, that you always seen Boone and them with. Nails they had to make. They said that was the most made thing by a blacksmith when they reached the frontier, was nails. You'd think maybe they was making gun parts or hinges or something, but I really never thought about making the nails, but they made each individual nail.
We've got a homemade nail at the museum from the
Yeah.
courthouse.
Yeah, sure do. But it's hard for us to imagine how little they actually could bring with them. Now, the man that had 20 horses, he probably packed in a lot of things. But even their farm implements that they might have brought, they might have brought the bit to a plow and made the rest of the old plow out of wood, you know? They might have brought a shovel, but I'd say they made the handle after they got here. Of course, my granddad, I don't think any implement he used in his garden had a store-bought handle in it. Every one of them was an old wood handle that he had carved out. None of them had store-bought handles in them. And that was probably left over from, you know, these people. When they got into the, got it turned around the wrong way. When they got into the forts and stations. Forts and stations, the big difference, and the blockhouse. A station was more of a privately owned. It wasn't as much military. Most of what they called forts, even if they wasn't military forts, they were started by military men. Okay, somebody that had a lot of military background to them. They would call it a fort. Everybody else would call it a station. Now early, when they first started coming over, these forts and stations was where they all stayed. And they were about 15 to 20 miles away. Now, there's Masker Station is still standing. Well, a replica of it standing. Martin Station has a replica there. We hear areas, Bean Station, anybody ever heard of Bean Station, Campbell Station? They were named after these stations. And they had these about every 15 to 20 miles. And that's what a party hoped to go in a day's travel. They was walking about 15 to 20 miles every day from station to station. But you always wanted to go into a station at night. Because if you didn't, chances are you'd get killed. You'd get killed. And there were stations from East Tennessee all through to Middle Tennessee, to Nashville, and probably further. You don't hear about any stations around here really. But if you read some of the old stories and stuff that comes out, the Qualls family talks about two boys that was born in Overton County in the old fort. During the Civil War, they talk about men going up and hiding from the troops so they didn't get conscripted, didn't get drafted, and they hid in the old fort. So chances are there was an old fort here in Overton County. Now Helen Qualls puts that old fort on Maxwell Mountain. Y'all know where Maxwell Mountain is? If you go just past Webb's store out on 111, the big mountain you come to right there on the left, that's what they call Maxwell Mountain. And there is an old stone fort up there. Now my family and the Swallows family, we both called it, our family called it the sugar camp. They knew about it, and they called it the sugar camp because they used to go up there, and I think they used to tap the maple trees when the time was right, and they stayed in the old sugar camp. But I believe that's the same thing that people was calling a fort. And I've been up to it. It's been back in the 80s I was up to it. I don't know what's still left of it, but there wasn't nothing but a few rocks around there. And there may have been more forts besides that. We know Fort Blunt. We know where it was. But there's some pictures on here of some of these. This is Masker Station. This is down in Goodlettsville. Now see this house, and I've got another picture. This one on the side where the top looks bigger than the bottom, that is a blockhouse. That was always the corner house of a station or a fort. They usually always had a blockhouse on the side. See up there at the top, the little bitty windows, them's gun ports. Can y'all see the little windows up there on top? Like right through here? Those are gun ports. That's what they were shooting out of. Most stations, most forts were an acre square. That's how big they were. Everything, of course, the ones that's got replicas and stuff built, they're state parks now, so they do have trees, but everything within about 400 yards of that fort was clear cut. Not even a shrub would be standing. It was clear cut. Inside the forts, let's see, there's a good picture of a blockhouse. Inside of the fort, they had row houses. This right here is Fort Loudon. But this is the row of houses, side by side. Most forts or stations would have from 8 to 12 families staying. Now families consisting of mother, father, children, maybe even some parents or in-laws. And then you take in every visitor that comes down the road into your station. There was a station that was burnt down in East Tennessee. Now you got to figure, 1 acre square, about the size of it, 268 people living in that station when it was burnt down. Now, I grew up in the 60s and 70s in Nashville. We had little houses that was on a half-acre lot, back before they had air conditioning, and everybody raised their windows. Guess what? I knew everything the neighbors was doing. I knew every time they was fussing. I knew every time they was cooking. I knew everything that was going on in any neighbor's house at any given time. Can you imagine living this close? Now these houses here at Fort Loudon, they were bunk houses, but they were built for families. So not just one family stayed in one of these houses. There was probably 2 or 3 families stayed in each one of these houses. Now when the wagons rolled in there to get secure, I just can't imagine living like that. Now you've got all your dogs in there. So you're talking 8 families, plus their visitors, plus all these dogs. You got your blacksmith shop in there. You got your place where they're washing in there. Everything that was going, if there was a mill, it was inside the fort or inside the station. Most of your livestock was outside the station, beside a few riding horses. They'd keep a few riding horses in there for escape if they needed to. But all that was inside the station. I just can't imagine the unsanitary conditions that they lived in. But people had jobs. And you know, there was somebody that got paid to go pick up all the dog poop every day. Why'd they pick it up? They used it. They leached it out for making gunpowder. It was somebody's job to go pick up the urine every day. They used it. What'd they use it for? They used it in making gunpowder. They used it in tanning leather. They used it in washing clothes. That makes you feel real good. The ammonia, the ammonia in the urine, they used it for washing clothes. And apparently it was supposed to be real good to get out stains. I have never tried it. Of course, the later settlers that come in wagons. That changed the whole ball game for settlers coming in, especially Middle Tennessee, because now, besides the river, of course, here in Overton County, we don't have river access like Nashville does. There wasn't big boats coming through. The wagon trains coming through, I don't know why it keeps splitting back. The wagon trains, when they started coming through, that started letting merchandise come through. That's when they started getting the stuff. But, you know, our families, and most everybody in here, I'm sure's family, probably come before Tennessee was Tennessee. I would say the biggest part of us in here, our families come before it was actually Tennessee. So they walked over. You know, they didn't ride a boat to Livingston. We know that. They lived like this. And the one thing that always amazes me, they lived like this, so me and you and you and you and you could live better. That's what they done it for, so we would have a better life. Now the people that come over and a lot of stuff that's written, and you get preachers coming over in those early years, and they talked about how ungodly the settlers were. Said they didn't take time on Sunday to do anything but pray, listen to a scripture, and then they went back about their daily life. And he said they were ungodly. Well, you had a dairy farm, didn't you? Did them cows get milked on Sunday? Absolutely. Life goes on. You know, and farmers today understand that there's things that have to be done on the farm, whether it's Saturday, Sunday, or whatever. Can you imagine the frontier? They were just surviving. You know, they did take time to do a devotion, but they had to get back to living. They had to get back to living. They had to do their thing every day. It's a shame, some of the stories they tell about, and you get a lot of the preachers because they were writing diaries. Most of the settlers didn't have time to write diaries, you know. They weren't documenting a whole lot. But you do have a lot of famous people that did write some, I think that's the last one, ain't it? Yeah. That did write some documents, and nobody didn't work. They all worked. Every one of them, including the little children, worked. And you know, it makes me think, when I was a kid, my grandpa, when all us grandkids was born, first thing that he'd give us was a pair of overalls and a hoe. And he would take that hoe, and he had a grinder, and instead of it being a big hoe like this, he would grind it down to where it had a little bitty head on it and a little bitty old short stick on it. And he didn't give it to you to look at it. I'll promise you, he put you out in that garden and put you to hoeing. That's what you did. So you had your overalls and your hoe before you was 2 years old. And I'm sure that's the way that they were raised, you know? And it all stems from these settlers that come in here that had to work like it. They had to make that living. Jobs that some of them may have had ways that a lot of them would have made money, the early settlers, hunting. They say that a hunter that was selling his pelts was making $1,700 to $2,000 a year. Now apparently, that was as much as a merchant or a banker back east. They were making good money on furs. They really was. Farmers, I reckon they've always been poor, and I reckon that's the way it's always gonna be. There ain't no change for a farmer. That's just life. But
you know what you're talking about. I always liked mine and Joe's kin folks had good bottomland out here.
yeah,
And they sold out and went in the mountains, and I used to wonder why, and I found out, like you said.
the fur trade.
Yeah, the fur trade, they made more off the fur than they
Fur
did.
trade, that's what brought people here to start with in this area. The hunters, like the first bunch of lone hunters that come in here, the fur trade was unreal. They could go out for 2 years and they would make 6 times the money that they would have made if they had have stayed back east, if they come out alive. And that's a big if. That's a big if. Anybody got any questions about anything?
Those early hunters, like, they didn't come to themselves.
No.
Yeah. Some people think they found this going by themselves, they're called out.
No.
They didn't like them.
When they come in, I reckon, and I've read several stories on it, and they would come in, and there again, each one of the men would have about 5 or 6 horses or more, because they had to have something to pack all the furs out on once they got them. So sometimes they'd have more. And they'd have that many dogs, and they'd be moving in groups of 40 or 50 people, each one of them having the same amount of stuff. You get that many horses and that many dogs, ain't nobody in the country don't know you're not there. You know, every native knew exactly where them men were. But they were such large groups. And of course they had the natives outgunned at the time. That's one thing at Fort Loudon, when they moved into Fort Loudon during the French and Indian War, like I said, most of the forts had a good gunsmith. Well, they had a good gunsmith. And the Cherokee were bringing their guns over, and this gunsmith was working on their guns. And we was up there, and the guy that was working as the blacksmith, he said they were bringing their guns over and you know, getting them worked on by the blacksmith there. Our little grandson said, that don't sound like a good idea. Park ranger said it turned out not to be a very good idea. And you know, of course it wasn't, because they fixed all the Cherokee's guns and then they slaughtered them. So, but a lot of the Cherokees, when you see it, a lot of their killing was payback. A lot of it wasn't that they were just out. Of course, some of it, hey, you took my property. But like Fort Loudon, that was payback, because The Europeans struck first in that. And when they killed the same amount back. So, well,
What about, you didn't touch on the whiskey making, all this whiskey.
I guarantee you that was one of the people that they brought with them. Somebody that can make whiskey.
It is.
I guarantee it.
You know, they had what's called whiskey rebellion.
Yeah. You know,
They didn't want to pay tax on it.
well, and of course they used it not only to drink, they used it medicinally.
That was a major exchange.
Yeah. It was a revenue. It was really, I mean, I know I've got a letter at the house that my great grandfather wrote, him and two other men. Of course, my great grandpa owned a store down in Wendell, and they wasn't none of them gonna drink for 6 months. Okay, so they wrote up a compact, and they wrote it, and they put seals on it, and the whole 9 yards, and none of the three of them was gonna drink for 6 months. And if any of them broke the contract, they owed the other two a $3 hat. But if you got sick, you could drink. They did stipulate if you got sick, it was okay, and that did not break the contract. I'd say them three men stayed sick for 6 months. I would say that's what happened.
Well, you have to have account for
Well, yeah,
everything.
that's right.
But like Carl told me, they thought that was a right. I mean, you know.
Oh, yeah.
They took it as a right, didn't they, Carl? They thought they.
Well, like I say, the people that settled in Tennessee with the Watauga Association and them making that government, they were rebellious. I mean, Tennessee started out just saying, hey, we don't need England, we don't need North Carolina, we don't need none of you. We're going to do our own thing.
That's what was happening in Kings Mountain, wasn't it?
It is. It is. You know, Kings Mountain was a whole different deal too, wasn't it?
And you was talking about what people brought with them. I found where Sue's, like fifth grade aunt, brought a Dutch oven. And you know, you think
Mhm.
about it, you know, that meant they had something to eat. You know, they
Sure,
could bake
sure.
bread, they could make stews or whatever, you know. When I say she carried it, she was probably on a horse. But that was important because there wasn't no Walmart to buy.
Exactly. And you look, if you can find any list of what they might have brought with them, a lot of times that can tell you, did they come over here pre-Tennessee, pre-road system, or did they come over here after? If they brought a big item with them, they had a wagon, or they floated the river. That's the only two ways they could get a very big item in with them. Otherwise, it was packed on a horse. It was packed on a mule.
But then you touched on Fort Loudon also. That's where Bill and I we used to hunt together, deer hunt.
Mhm.
We got down in Jackson County about 65, and let's go down there where the old Fort was. We went down there, and this guy with the bulldozers and up, the jail was still standing.
Yeah.
He bulldozed that down and pushed the logs out there and it won't burn. And Bill, but they could restore the jail.
That's Fort Blunt instead of Fort Loudon. Fort Blunt down there in Jackson County. But when they put up the historical marker for Fort Blunt, it does say on the marker that the jailhouse is still standing. So whenever that was, they put up the historical marker.
It was a shame that go that way.
And one thing, no, these historical markers come in the late 1940s. Okay, that's when they started setting them. I think 49 was when they first started setting the Tennessee historical markers. Now, how much stuff was lost before they ever set the first one? How much history was lost before they ever set the first historical marker in the state of Tennessee? It's amazing, you know. They show maps of all these different little forts and stations. Most of them don't have a historical marker. Most of them are unknown. A lot of things have been lost. And these historical markers are a great thing. They're a great thing to have. But there again, if you know it, write it down. Write it down somewhere. Share it.
And if there's
No.
a place open, go visit, cause
Yeah.
that's how they get a lot of their money is
Oh, yeah.
visitors.
That's the one thing, when they started tearing down some of the historical markers and so on, people say, well, what can I do to stop them from doing this? Tear down these. The first thing you gotta do is go to them. I'm telling you, when people say they're getting revenue off of them, that changes their mind about what they tear down and don't tear down. You know, go to these parks, go to these places. We've got some of the best parks in the country right here in Tennessee.
I know, the old rock house in Sparta, it was on the Wilderness Trail, wasn't it, the
Mhm.
Wilderness?
Mm-hmm.
And it's still standing, it's open.
Yeah, I've been there.
We do tours and we're working on the DAR, Old Rock House DAR, we're working on getting a marker for the Wilderness Road through there, through Sparta.
And then you got
Cause it's still there, you can see where it was.
White Plains
Yeah.
and all good, and it's an old
Well, people
Stall.
like Jackson and people like that have been to all these.
yeah, yeah.
Cause it was the halfway
Oh,
point
yeah.
between Knoxville and Nashville on the Wilderness Road, the Rock House was.
But
Sam Houston stayed there.
Yeah. Now Sam Houston, why, he stayed with the Indians a lot, you know. why
He did.
He must have liked them by staying with them.
well, when he first went with them, they called him Old Crow.
Yeah.
That was his native name, and he really got into the native culture, you know. And of course, he had his marriage disaster.
Yeah.
And I don't think you could call it anything but a disaster. I mean, on your wedding night, your wife come out and say, I'm gonna kill that man. You know, after that, she never was really with him again, and they were divorced shortly after. Well, the next time he goes lives with the same natives, of course, by this time they had went from East Tennessee out to Oklahoma. So he goes out to Oklahoma to live with them again, and they call him the Old Drunk. They change his native name. He's no longer the Old Crow, he's the Old Drunk. So he changed, and the schoolhouse that he taught in is still standing. I went to it. It's just right outside of Maryville. It's a neat little trip.
But you know, there's another thing Louise brought up about seeds and everything. You know, they had to plan ahead of time, you know.
Well, and I think that's why, like Stephen Cope, they say, do we know if it's 100% true? We don't. But they say Stephen Copeland and Joe Copeland come over here and planted corn, went back, and come back with a party. Well, you had to have something to eat. They may have been looking at the trail. You know, it'd be a lot easier for 2 men to go down the trail, 2 or 3, as 100. But I think when they come back, there's so many of the names that we know now in Overton County that probably all come at the same time. People say, well, this one was first or that one was first. They probably all come in here at the same time, really.
Well, you can look at the census records back in North Carolina and South Carolina, and you can see these people, they live next door to these.
Mm-hmm. The first census taken in Overton County, 1810, was the first census they took. 5,200 people in Overton County. 5,260 something people in Overton County. But Overton County at that time took in part of Morgan County, all of Fentress County,
Pickett County.
all of Pickett County, part of Clay County, part of Putnam County.
Part of Jackson.
Yeah, it took in a lot more
Space.
land and property, but there were 5,000 and something people in it, and that was 1810. So you're looking 4 years after Overton County was formed. And I would say that they had set it up, you had to have so many people before that could be called a county. I would say there was a certain number you had to get to, and I'm thinking it's probably 5,000 since 2 years later they had 200 more, you know.
But after they opened up Cumberland Gap, think about how many wagon
Oh, yeah.
trains came
Yeah.
across that
Oh, yeah.
Cumberland Gap.
Yeah.
And that's another great place to go visit.
Mm.
Another great place. They have a genealogy day up there every year at the Cumberland Gap.
Well, you was talking about, the counties. I know I was looking up some of Sue's grandparents, and it showed them in Washington County. And I thought,
Yep.
they was in Overton County, but at that time, this was Washington.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, before Davidson County was formed, it was Washington County.
Yeah, 'cause
So when you get to looking these people up, you need, like you said, you need to know what county.
And it can tell you a pretty good, it can pinpoint when they come in here. It really can.
Cause it took 2 tries to get the state of Tennessee as a state.
Yes. Well, when Tennessee decided they was gonna become a state, their little rebellious streak of starting their own government a couple of times kinda come back to bite them. Because a lot of the states says, hey, these guys don't wanna go by the rules down here. We don't know if we want them to be a state. I know South Carolina voted against Tennessee becoming a state. Some of the New England states voted against Tennessee becoming a state. And when you read some of the records, a lot of it was because of what they done at the Watauga settlements, you know, and when they formed their own government and said, hey, you know, if you're not gonna help us, we're gonna do it ourselves. All right, is there any more questions?